Hey everybody, Chad Kalek here, and welcome back to the In a Crowded Room podcast for a very special episode. Let me start by saying over the last 6 months, you guys have heard me mention that I have a family member that has been struggling with health issues. If you follow me on social media, you know that I've revealed who that family member was. It was my father, and at 2:15 a.m. in the morning on April 21st, he passed away. And it's taken me about a week to get to a point where I can share some information with you guys. And I want to because he was and is, and always will be, the most amazing man, the most influential person in my life. I've said it a million times, but he is the only hero that I've ever known, and I want to share those stories so you guys know why. But I also think it's important to explain what happened and why he is no longer here. I haven't talked about it until now because it was very important to him that as he was battling to try to regain his health, that I did not publicize it. He did not want us to have to wake up every day and be, just encompassed by the details of his battle. My entire life, my father has been the guy that if he could hide, a broken arm from you, he would. If he had 105 degree temperature, other than his sweat, you'd never know it. I mean, he never wanted anyone to know when he was hurting or sick or anything like that, because he just couldn't stand to see anybody else, that he loved hurting. So I promised him that as long as he was battling to regain his health, then I would not discuss it, which was fine. I mean, I just wanted him to be healthy, and that was my concern. And if he can get better, then that was the only real goal. But he's not here now. And before I kind of explain what happened, this is going to be a really difficult podcast because I need to ask a favor of you guys. My family, like any family, there are many, emotional layers and details, and, it'd be impossible to sit down and just describe everything internally that goes on within a family, that shapes and forms the opinions of different family members and things like that. So I'm going to discuss the things that are relevant, which are the things about my father that I think are special, that I think you guys should know, that, I just believe his legacy deserves to be heard. And I'm sure this will be one of many ways that I will work to preserve his legacy. But there's going to be things that, I don't talk about. Obvious questions that'll come up that you guys will have that I won't delve into because I don't want to talk about those things, and I don't want this to become not about him. Specifically, what I'm talking about is my mother. I have no relationship with her. That is by choice. So even though it's tempting to kind of write your own narrative as to what may or may not have happened between us, I'm going to ask you to just trust me and trust that if I've chosen to not have a relationship with her, there's a good reason as to why. And I'll just leave it at that. So as I'm telling some of these stories, if her name naturally comes up and I don't delve down a road in the story that relates to her, that's why. God, my stomach's grumbling right now. I've hardly eaten over the last 3 or 4 days. It's been really, like I said, you think just because you know it's coming that it'll somehow be easier. And I can tell you that the finality, it's not something you can prepare for. Okay. Usually, guys, I have, some kind of a rough outline that I'm going to follow. And I didn't do that with this. Just because I don't even really know the outline I want to follow other than to just speak about this incredible man. But I need to start with how he passed away, because it's troubling to me. It's really troubling. Roughly 2 years ago, on my mother and father's 50th anniversary, my father was told that my mother wanted a divorce, in which they did. They got divorced. I was initially really concerned, just because anybody who spends that much time with somebody, the concern is, can they live a life without them now? Although this was a major event for my father, I fully supported it, and I was very excited for him, because I just felt like he would, have a brave new world waiting for him. My father joined the military, joined the Air Force when he was 18 to take care of a family, in which, his life since then has been filled with a lot of struggle. More often than not, to regain his health. Just so many things that he had been through, getting burned, which we'll discuss some of that, and his motorcycle accident. He just always had struggle and strife and anxiety, and it was just always his life. And through it all, he found a way to handle it, and to be a positive human being no matter what. And we'll get to that. But my point being, at the time, I was really excited for him, and although he was excessively hurt that that much of his life was given to a relationship that in the end did not last, I could see and hear in his voice that he was loving the fact that, he can go to a baseball game with his sister, my aunt. And he was calling me now every night. And for the first time, I was able to talk to my father without any restrictions. And it was wonderful, man. It was incredible. And he called nightly, and we would talk, an hour to 2 hours, almost every night. And he would stay up to call me. And Laura saw it, and she was just like, this is so good for you and for him. I mean, and I felt like I had, even if it was late, it's like I had this incredible relationship with my father. And it was always good, but it just went to another level so quickly. And I kept telling him I'm going to come home soon, and he was so excited every day. He was calling me and telling me about, the things he was getting for the house, and that he was decorating it, how he wanted to decorate it. And one of his favorite things to do was, believe it or not, he was a gardener. He loved gardening. And, his garden was looking so good, and he was so excited about that. And his neighbor their friendship just went to another level. And, like on the 4th of July, he was telling me how excited he was to walk down to the lake there in Carter Lake and watch the fireworks and have beers with his buddy. And this was the first time since he was 18 that he had been alone with a male friend to just have a beer. And I was so excited for him. And like I said, although it was difficult to go through the divorce, I was seeing this new person emerge, and he was becoming much more tender-hearted than he ever was before. Like I said, my entire life, my dad, he had maybe told me, he loved me, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times, and it was never like he didn't want to. It's just, my dad was old school, and he was a man, and just like saying he's proud. I knew he was proud of me, but he probably only told me 3 or 4 times, because you gotta earn that. He didn't just throw those words out there. Those were really valuable, heartfelt words, and if you heard it from him, it meant the world. I mean, yeah. To have my dad tell me he loved me or he was proud of me, I mean, that would make the earth rattle for me. I mean, it was just like such an important thing. But I noticed, in this last kind of rebirth, after the divorce, he would just say it more often. It would be getting off the phone. He'd be like, "Thanks for talking to me, boy. I know you got a life there, and I really appreciate it. And I don't want to be a burden to you. So if I'm calling too much, I'd be like, no, Dad, not at all, man. I love this. I love talking with you." And he'd be like, "Okay, well, listen, just tell Laura I love her, and I love you, son." And I was like, "Wow, I love you too, Dad." And it's just not something I heard a lot growing up. So the fact that this was consistently kind of being spoken, like I said, I knew he felt it in his heart. He meant it. There was a side of him that was waking up. And, he obviously felt safe to say those words and to share those emotions. And again, I had so much excitement because of that. I'm really just seeing, his heart. And so I was super excited. And he was calling every day. And then I had a couple trips for work, and I was going to be gone for the better of 2 weeks. I was in and out. And I said, I'll give you a call, once these 2 weeks are up. You can call me anytime, I told him. You can call me anytime you want. But if I don't hear from you, that's fine, because I'm going to go on the road here for a little bit. And, when I return, I'll give you a call. And I did. I went on the road. I didn't hear from him. But I didn't think much of it. I just thought, well, he's got all these new, friendships, and, he's doing things with Terry now, and, he's getting his place together, and he was, had just finished up the official actual paperwork of the divorce. And I wasn't really paying attention to the calendar, but one day I just realized that 3 weeks had gone by, and he didn't call me over the 2 weeks that I was gone, but that was okay because we discussed that. But he knew what day I got home. And I'm telling you guys, we were talking every single night, for at least an hour, if not more. And I was like, that's kind of weird that I haven't heard from him this whole week. But I felt weird in a good way, So I gave him a call, and I just heard, "Hello." I'm like, "Hey, what's up, Pops?" "Hey." And right away, I was like, oh, something's weird. This demeanor's totally changed. And I'm like, "What's wrong?" And We went back and forth, and he kept saying nothing, nothing, nothing. And I finally was like, Dad, listen, don't do this to me, man. What is going on? And he said that he just had crippling anxiety, but he didn't know why. And I'm like, what do you mean crippling? And he was like, I'm afraid to do anything. I'm afraid of what'll happen if I do anything. And I didn't understand at all what he was talking about. I'm like, what do you mean you're afraid to do anything? And he goes, well, it's like if I go out in the garden and I work in the garden, what'll happen if like a pipe breaks in the house? And I'm like, huh? And he's like, yeah, what'll happen if a pipe breaks in the house and the water, gets everywhere? I'm like, well, has this happened before? And he was like, well, no, but it can happen. It could. And I'm like, well, if that would happen, you would come in and work on it and fix it, I guess. And he's like, well, what if it happens in the winter when I'm sleeping? And it just freezes up, and then I can't do anything. Then I got no water here. And this went on for, a good hour we talked. And yeah, he was just, and it was all minutia. It was just tiny things. He was just, stressing over. And he told me that he hadn't been going anywhere and that he was worried because, his sister wanted him to come over for dinner. And he was afraid of coming over because he knew he wasn't normal and he didn't want to make her worry. And I said, well, you got to get past that. We need, you need to see a doctor, and he took some different medications. I probably shouldn't talk about his private medical records, but the point being is there was nothing that he took that should have done anything crazy like this. We're just like, overnight, this happens. And basically, he said that he was fine the 2 weeks that I was gone. But like right after I had gotten home, he said it happened overnight. He just woke up and he felt this way. He just had anxiety, and it made him scared to leave the house, scared to stay in the house. He would just pace in circles, he said. So, long story short, this is getting worse and worse. And every time I'm calling there, he's getting worse and worse. And where there was a calm but concerned demeanor at first, there's becoming a very manic, hyper demeanor. And some of the details are starting to get pretty weird. And he's telling me that there's people watching him, and, he's got to keep the people out of the house because they're going to come and try to steal his house and take everything from him. And I finally called up Terry and my dad's sister, and I just said, Dad's been really concerned. They didn't want me to talk to you, but, obviously there's something going on with him. Have you witnessed this? And she's like, you should be concerned because I have spoken to him twice, and we don't know what's going on. And I got him back on the phone, and I just asked him, had he been taking any drugs? And he said, no. I said, okay, have your medications, are you taking any of them different? And he was kind of messing around with his medications, but it was more like forgetting to take one pill in the morning, you take two at night type of thing. And I was really hopeful, because like I said, it was just, I don't want to, release his medical records here, but like, there wasn't anything, that should be, massively altering. But I was hopeful that I'm just not a doctor and I'm wrong, and maybe that could happen. So he started talking to his doctors about his medications and what he was taking. And, they got together with him and they had basically a strategy to, isolate each medication and slowly reintroduce it and adjust those levels and see if it had a positive effect. They could balance him out, basically. What was insane is no matter what they did, no matter what they added, reintroduced, no matter what they doubled up, took away, canceled, he had the same issue the whole time. And it was steadily getting worse and worse. And the issue was just an ungodly, overwhelming amount of anxiety And now it had gotten to the point where when I was calling, I was hearing about how there were 9 monsters that were looking for him. And these birds in the front of the house, he told me one night, were watching him. I knew things were just completely off the deep end. When I called, and I was concerned with what he was eating at the time. He was eating, out of his garden. And I'm thinking, well, that's one place, where his food source could be messed with. Who knows? You're trying anything at this point, right? So I had asked him to stop eating out of his garden, and I sent him money to get groceries. And he had went to the grocery store, and he ended up standing 6 hours in the aisle. He felt like there were people in there that were waiting for him to leave, and they were going to grab him, and they were going to steal his house, and it frustrated him and scared him. I'd rather relive over all this, guys, because it's just super hard to talk about. Just suffice to say, he just really started losing it mentally, and eventually he started hurting himself. He started hitting himself. He would pace around in circles out of anxiety. He would hit himself until he was bruised up and swollen, and he couldn't be alone anymore. And they kept saying, we don't know what's wrong with him. We don't know what his diagnosis is. We can't diagnose him. And I thought, well, maybe we can see different doctors, because he only had like VA for his health. He didn't have like full health insurance and stuff. But my aunt made sure that he saw everybody there was to see, regardless of the money. And it didn't matter who the doctor was. They couldn't diagnose him. He showed signs of multiple things, but it didn't matter what they did to him, no matter what they gave him. That's what I'm trying to say. There'd be no effect. And the thing is, no matter what your mental condition is, for example, if you just pour a shitload of Klonopin on somebody's brain, it should have an effect. If you just jack up crazy levels of Seroquel for long amounts of time, it should have an effect. Nothing affected him. He just kept getting more and more scared, making less and less sense. And he stopped eating. He stopped eating. And my dad was usually around 205 pounds, and then suddenly, the last time I spoke to him, he told me about he got weighed, he said he was 165, and I was like, Jesus, that's whoa. And this was like in a matter of like a month, maybe 6 weeks. He lost close to 40 pounds. And another month or two went by, and Brian told me he was down to like 130 pounds. And I'm like, what? And Brian had eventually picked him up and moved him, and he ended up living with Brian for a while, and he was in and out of treatment centers, because Brian just broke his heart to just leave Dad there, because in Dad's mind he was terrified that monsters were coming to get him, and Germans were coming to get him, and he was talking about some murder that happened that was a secret, and he knew what happened, and it was just the craziest stuff you've ever heard. And eventually he started getting violent towards Brian out of fear, not out of, and Brian told me, well, he's losing his memory. He doesn't know who I am sometimes. And Brian finally said to me, he's not really there, but if you want to call him, here's the number. And this is the new facility he was in. And guys, I got to tell you, it was the last actual phone call I had with him. And man, in the middle of the phone call, he just asked me who I was. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, who are you? And I'm like, Dad, it's Chad. Who? I'm like, it's Chad. What agency are you with? And I'm like, Dad, I don't know what's going on. It's me, your son. I don't have a son named Chad. I spent the next 10 minutes trying to jog his memory. And I was gone. I was out of his brain. And I hurt so bad for him because I knew that was happening. He was losing memories of all these good things and all these people that love him, and his brain was populating these new thoughts that were crazy. And the doctors were they did every test imaginable, and they could not diagnose him. And then suddenly I hear something that scared the living shit out of me. They said he's going to start receiving ETSs. If you don't know what that is, it's electroshock therapy, where they would shock his brain. And they told my brother that it was to basically, that it would force all the medications out of his brain and they can start over, and that he'd be okay and this would work and it would alleviate his anxiety, because at this point he's just either walking in circles or rocking or, banging his head against shit and still refusing to eat the whole time. And they gave him a long series of multiple electroshocks, electricity to the brain. And they, walked Brian through every step of it, and they, made Brian understand that they had no other options, and this was kind of like the last thing to try, but they were so very confident in this. It was going to work, They told him this is going to work, They didn't promise him, but they just felt like this would work, and it didn't work. And they kept shocking him, and each time Brian would pick him up, Brian would have such hope in his voice. And Dad would be quiet, more subdued. But that's all the shocks did. He hated them. He hated that procedure. And it was killing him. It was killing Brian. It was killing Terry. I mean, we all just wanted to know what was wrong with him. Just tell us what's wrong with him and then fucking treat him. Because we all knew what that means. If you don't know what he has, you don't know how to fix it. Just give me a second. I'm gonna take a break. I'll be right back. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, well, I don't want to go over any more of these details, guys. I just eventually he lost his ability to talk and recognize anything, and he refused to eat. They put a food tube in him, and he started getting really sick, and then he got pneumonia. And towards the end of his pneumonia, they thought he might have had COVID. They told Brown they thought he had it, but we did find out that at the time of his passing, he did not. So he did not die of COVID-19. He died because he got super sick, because he stopped eating and he stopped drinking. And he got sick. And he wasn't doing anything to replenish his immune system. And after 3 rounds of antibiotics, he did not respond. In which we were told that the only thing keeping him alive was his feeding tube. And that was at risk of getting infection. And if the feeding tube were to get infected, it could, make an already abysmal ending to life even worse. So, because we knew here our whole life, he had always told us that if he was ever on any kind of machine to keep him alive or anything like that, then if there was no way back, then don't do that to him. Let him go. Let him cross over and let him go to the light. But before this all happened, the worst fucking thing happened, which was that they were disallowing visitors. Nobody could see him. Nobody could go see him. And the one thing that I did not want to see happen was for him to die alone. But you guys would know, I'd be honest with you, and I'd tell you if I did or didn't get a visitation, but I do believe I did. And my brother got one around the same time without us even talking to each other. We just both knew when it happened. And I had woken up at 5 a.m. And I walked down the living room, and it just felt like he was sitting on the chair. I didn't see him. It's like I saw a ghost or anything. I just felt his presence. In which I did. I just said, Dad, you did your job, man. You did your job. You were the glue to everything. You were the protector, the inspirer, man. Just the soldier. Like, you persevered in every way, man. And the good things that I am were due to you. If there's any justice, Dad, I will see you on the other side. Please, go. And a little over 24 hours later, he was gone. They say he died of pneumonia. But he died because he didn't want to live anymore. And I don't know how a man in 6 months time period goes from being 200, 205 pounds, incredibly healthy, jogging miles each day, working on, cars and rebuilding them, eating incredibly healthy food, to being, 125, 130 pounds. His mind completely fails him, body completely fails him, and he's gone in 6 months. And not a doctor can tell us what happened. So that is what occurred, and it should be known. It should be known because I know he would want the truth out there. I know he wouldn't want anyone thinking that he died of COVID-19. I know there's more to this, I got to know what happened, and but now's not the time to try to figure it out. But though there will come a time where I try to understand what occurred with him. But more importantly, I just want to get that out of the way because I want to share with you the reasons why I love this man so much and why he was so incredibly important to me. When I was really young, I didn't really have a relationship with him, primarily because he wasn't around. As an Air Force engineer, he was traveling the world, fixing helicopters and planes. And what I knew at that time is that he was in the Air Force, and I didn't really know what the Air Force was per se, but I knew it was military because he had these just awesome uniforms that he would wear. And I didn't really know what our government was. I didn't really know what government did, but I knew in my mind my dad was so important to our government that, 360 days out of the year, he had to be doing something all over the world. He had to be fixing planes, and he was only home for a few days. So when he was, it was awesome because it was just like this guy that was, in my mind is how I view this guy that was so important to the government, that was flown all over the place, that had this crazy skill set, and he was in uniform, and he was my dad, and he was in I remember I used to ask him, where he was, stationed at times. And when he first got in, he did a lot of flying overseas, and he'd be like, yeah, I was in Germany and France and England. I'm like, Germany, France, and England? And he's like, yeah. And I was, in Switzerland. And then, for a time period, I was in Spain. And I'm like, Switzerland and Spain? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, where were you last time? And he was like, well, I just got back from Guam. I'm like, you just got back from Guam? I didn't even know where Guam was. I had no idea. It just seemed like a different planet to me because it was just so... I never heard of it, Guam. I had no idea that it was just this little island with this base where they just basically put together secret planes. That's essentially what they did. But yeah, Guam's just this tiny little, property of the U.S. But regardless, I think it's cool now. I just thought he was cool, man. I thought this is awesome. My dad is this soldier, and he's gone this many days out of the year to make sure that we're okay and that we have a home. And although I hated that he wasn't around much, I did. A part of me loved what he did because it just seemed so heroic to me. And I wanted to know so much about him. And that was hard because he was only home for a couple days. And when he was home, of course, he's trying to spend time with mom. And you also don't want to bother him, if that makes sense, just because he's only home for a few days. So, I never felt like I really had the time to, like, develop any real deep, kind of even father-son relationship at that time. Um, I just, like I said, I knew this really cool guy, like, did this. But even then, like I said, he wasn't one to just dole out the "I love yous." You'd have to work for it. And when he came home, he was always concerned with, how am I doing in school? How am I doing with grades? How am I, just all the things that a father should be concerned about. And, when it came to disciplining, my entire life, my father only struck me twice. Twice. And I can tell you both times I absolutely deserved it. And by the way, when I say struck me, he didn't beat me. And there's a difference between disciplining a child and beating a child. My father never beat me. But I bring the story up because this kind of just shows you, the story will show you his integrity and just how much it meant to me not to break his heart. In both of these times when he hit me, that's not what hurt. It was just a look in his eye. And I'll tell you, the first time was, he just happened to be home. No, he had actually just gotten out of the service. And I got in trouble at school because Nolan Ryan's kid, Reese, he was in my grade. People used to collect these stamps. They were like, it sounds cheesy, but it'd be like Care Bear stamps and pirate stamps and breakdancing stamps, and they were just stamps. And they were really big the same time that breakdancing was big. And I don't remember how it happened, but at lunch, Reese started giving me a hard time about how I didn't have anything new, and my lunchbox was just a brown paper bag. I didn't actually have a lunchbox per se, and he was making fun of my clothes, and we were very poor, and he was Nolan Ryan's kid. He was really rich, and he was showing off these stamps that he had, and he was stamping people's papers and their hands, and he stamped everybody's hands with this cool, that was a Flash Gordon stamp, and he didn't stamp mine. And I got pissed. So I stole them. And I stole them because I wanted him, I wanted Reese to realize that, you can lose things just as quickly as you can gain them. And if you pick on the wrong person, you never know what's going to happen. That person might retaliate. And I wanted him to know. So I stole them. To this day, it's the only time in my life I've ever stole anything. And my dad got a phone call, about me stealing them, that Reese believed that I stole them. So they were just calling, to talk to my parents to see if this, they could check and see. And so my dad said that he would check and he would call them back. So I was outside at the time, and he called me inside, and he told me the story that they had called, and he wanted to know if I stole the stamps. Oh my God, I just did not. I did not want to tell him the truth. Because I just knew it would hurt him. But I couldn't lie to him either. Because A, he was going to find them. They were in my book bag. And B, it just makes everything even worse, Stealing's one thing, but then lying about it to my father's face. It's just, So to make a long story short, yeah, I told him I did it. I told him why. And he said to me, "You're going to give them all back. Every last fucking one." And I said, okay, hoping that was going to be, the end of it. But of course, that was not. Let me see. Son, come here. He sat down on this bench that he had. It was a wood crafting bench. Because, by the way, we were living in the one-bedroom house that he had built for us to live in while he made plans to build a larger house. This was his life's work that he was going to accomplish. It says, come here, and I walk over there and looked at me, and he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but like, you cannot steal. It's a measure of character. If it's not yours, it's not yours. If you want it, you have to earn it. Basically explained to me that in life, the only thing that ultimately matters when it comes to ourselves is integrity and honor. And he essentially told me that I acted disgraceful. And in that moment, I was a disgrace. And he told me to get over his knee. And just, oh man, thinking about it now, it turns my stomach. I leaned over his knee and he hit me one time on the butt. And to be honest, guys, it wasn't even hard. But the impact I felt to my core. I immediately let the tears fly. And I looked back and I saw tears in his eyes. And that crushed me. That crushed me. Just that he would be crushed over the fact that when it comes to a measure of integrity that I failed him. And it was exactly the way he should have handled it, because I never stole again. Like I said, I never stole again. And that look in his eye was enough. And I learned everything that I needed to learn. And like I said, the smack on my butt wasn't even hard. That was just, I think he knew that was just the fact that I would have to do that. It was just gut-wrenching to me, I think he knew that for sure. That was humiliating. It taught me everything I need to know about that, The other time that he hit me, I was just being such an ass to him. I was running late for a baseball game, and he was in the basement of our house in Persia, and he was hanging drywall. And he was hanging it there's all the ceiling, and he was trying to push it up, and with one hand, hold the whole piece of drywall up with one hand, and then with the nail gun drive these nails in it. And he asked me for some help, and I was running late, and I hop up there, and he's taking a sweet time to line everything up, and I'm just like, Jesus, old, come on. Like his nickname I called him was Old. So I'm like, Jesus, old, hurry the fuck up. And he looks back at me, he's like, you better watch how you're talking to me, boy, and I was thinking, yeah, probably shouldn't talk to Dad that way. He puts another nail in, and he's just taking his time, just taking his time. And I just go, oh, today, and he turns back and he was like, you ain't got to be down here. I just asked you for help. And I go, oh, you just asked me. He's like, yeah. I'm like, so I can just drop this right now. And he said, yeah. But he didn't mean like right now, because if I dropped it right now, it'd break in half. I go, so I can leave right now? And he goes, yeah. And I just let it go and it dropped. And that thing just shattered. The drywall just shattered. And I knew before before that drywall hit the floor, I knew I need to get out of this room. And we were downstairs. And I just turned. I can see it in my head like in slow motion. I just turn and take off running full speed for the stairs, and I could hear him behind me. I could hear his deep breathing. I could hear his body movement, his motion. He's kicking shit, as he's coming after me. And God, he seems so close to me, and I'm like, if he gets his hands on me, he is gonna fuck me up, man. And I got to the bottom of the stairs, and I took an extra long extended stair to try to get the first stair so I could jump halfway up. And my toe slipped, and I went face first right into the stairs, and he reared back like an NFL kicker kicking a field goal, man. And he kicked my ass into my shoulders. I have never been kicked that hard in the butt. That's all he did, kick me one time and just told me to get the F out of there. He doesn't ever want to see me again. He was just so pissed. And he was like, I don't ever see you again if you act this way. And, of course, I felt terrible, like right when the game was over. Drove back home and I'm like, Dad, I am so sorry, man. I am so sorry. You just wanted some help, man. It's not like the game... if I just showed up 5 minutes after the game started, I'd have been fine. He just needed my help, and I was just being an ass. And so again, the second time in my life that he punished me, I totally deserved it. And he handled it the right way, too. I know a lot of people that would have lost their temper and would have, done something really stupid, and start whacking on you with the clothes fist. He didn't do that. He kicked me in the butt, and I deserved it. I totally deserved it. But I love that about my dad, is that he never used like physical strength to be domineering to try to teach me any kind of lessons. The lessons that he taught, most of the time, he taught by demonstration, how he lived his life. My dad, I've never heard him. He has many talents. Never heard him brag about one. Never. I can't think of a time in my life where my dad said something in which he was bragging about his abilities. Ever. But he was also quick to point out his flaws and openly talk about, doing better and trying to fix himself. It's weird when you think about that, but how many people in your life have you met that have never, hyped up themselves, something they do, some talent they have, something they own, it wasn't in his nature. It was not in Rod Calek's nature. And I love that about him. There was always just a silent confidence that he had, where if he was going to do something, and believe me, when I tell you he was an engineer, he could build and manufacture and construct and fix, take apart, put together anything. For example, on my 8th birthday, I wanted a go-kart, like drive around go-kart, because my parents had just bought 2 acres of land, and he was going to build this 1-bedroom house there, and I wanted a go-kart. And there was a place locally that was selling them. And I think they were selling it for like $300 or $400, which that kind of money, $300-400 for us was unheard of. We were dirt ass poor. So he knew how badly I wanted it. So he looks at the go-kart and just kind of walks around. He's staring at it. He's going, huh. So from the go-kart place, we went to the junkyard. I didn't know what we were doing. We just went there. Dad went for a walk. The next thing I know, he's backing the truck up and he loaded a bunch of stuff up. Still had no idea what he was doing. 2 weeks later, my birthday comes, and I have a brand new, but not brand new, go-kart. He constructed one. He got a little engine, little tiny engine that I think was on either a lawnmower or a weed eater or something, and all this scrap metal and these wheels. He constructed the most amazing, badass go-kart that he literally built from nothing but junk at the junkyard, and he was just ready to go. I mean, I was like, this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, I'm sure you'd probably laugh at that because the guy also, built military jet engines. But, the idea that he can just look at something from memory and just roll into a junkyard and 2 weeks later have something that is not only what I wanted, but a killer version of one. It was a little bit bigger than the other ones. It was faster than the other ones that I saw. Had bigger wheels on it because we were out on 2 acres of land. So he wanted it to be more like, I guess, 4x4 style, so I could actually get around on the dirt. It was amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it was just stuff like that I would see and be like, God damn, that is cool. It's just the nature of him, and I learned a lot through that. I learned that it's not always about, what you can buy versus what you can build. And what he built me was not only a better version of what we could have bought, I appreciated it so much more because he built it. The man hours and the ingenuity and the heart. And I remember that being this lesson in my head that, what you can build is always better than what you can buy. Always. But unfortunately, I didn't get to, have many more of those life experience lessons from him when he was healthy, because shortly after that is when he got burned. Now, if you've seen American Ghost Hunter, or if you haven't, it graphically shows some of the photos of my father's injury. My father was burnt on 3/4 of his body, 77%, 3rd degree. And oddly enough, he was burned literally at the same time. At the same time that I crushed my ankle playing basketball, in elementary school. So as I was in the ambulance with the EMTs on the way to the hospital for what would be an emergency surgery for a crushed growth plate, my dad was being life flighted to Galveston for the burn unit. So a lot of people have asked me before, what exactly happened? How did he get burned? He got burned trying to save people. And that's just a fact. When I say that my father was a hero to me, he got burned because he was working at a concrete company where he was the head engineer there. And there was a gentleman that should have never been hired. A lot of illegal labor is hired in southern Texas. And the only reason I bring that up, and the only reason I state that, is because in this case it was a major issue, because this gentleman was hired, not by my father, by the foreman, and put into a position in which he would have to use a welder, which he had never welded before. He had no welding experience. And he was welding as somebody was draining the oil and gasoline out of a mixer. And my dad doesn't remember who it was because he never got a look at him. But basically my dad walked in and saw that this guy was welding, first off, without a mask. And then my dad also happened to see that there was a guy pulling this gasoline and oil in this 5-gallon drum on wheels, about 5 feet behind the guy welding. So my dad goes up right away, basically to tell the guy, cut the torch. And before he can do it, some sparks fly into the 5-gallon drum from the welding torch and the metal that he's welding. And it just ignites this 5-gallon drum of gasoline and oil, which there's oil residue throughout the whole, building, plus dust and everything else. So my dad knows that he's got to put that fire out, or that whole building, could potentially go up. And there's tons of people in the building. So he throws a tarp over it, and The tarp obviously contains the fire inside the tarp, though. And as quickly as he can, he starts rolling the drum towards the front of the door to get it out onto the main loading dock, where he can then, let the tarp off, and if it ignites, it'll just burn itself out. But when he got to the loading dock, there was a crack in the concrete, and as he was pulling the oil drum, the wheels hit the crack, in which the oil drum remained stationary as the contents slushed out up and under the tarp and all over my dad's body, in which all it needed was oxygen to ignite. It ignited. My dad was wearing a company-issued uniform that said it was 100% cotton. It was not. It was 70% polyester. If you know anything about polyester, it doesn't burn. It melts. Unfortunately, the uniform melted into 3/4 of his body. Now, I could go on for hours about this entire situation, but he was not supposed to make it. Twice the doctors took us to say goodbye to him, in which he lived, but had he not, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. Like, I don't know what we would have done. But he somehow, man, he lived. The doctors told me to my face it was a medical miracle. They thought he would have a 16-week initial recovery schedule. He was home in 6 weeks. Yeah, it was amazing. Just amazing. And to watch, guys, him suffer through, like, the thing with burns is you have to change the dressing every day, 3 times a day, because there's no skin, so it just weeps. So all the dressing on it just weeps. And if you leave it for any amount of time, with the air and the germs in the air and dust and everything else, you just get incredibly sick. And the whole time, their fear is, well, on 3/4 of his body, it's an open wound. So he's just going to die of infection. And what they do in those scenarios is they pump the body full of fluid. They put just a ton of antibiotics through his system, and they just change the dressings. And when they change the dressings, it's incredibly painful for him, because all the areas in his body where the burn stopped, and the areas where the skin was burnt 3rd degree, it burnt through the nerves. So where the actual burns are, he doesn't feel the pain in that area, but on the edges, right, the edges of where the burn stops, those are all exposed nerves. Those are all exposed nerves. So you get the point, right? This is the most excruciating, injury you could ever have. And just to watch him battle through that day after day after day. And he knows this. And I told him that back then, the first time I ever prayed to God, I prayed for God to take him. I was just like, he is not going to make it through this. Like, this is, he's going to die of infection. Like, why? This is so cruel to just make this person, and I'm like, and if he does live, he's going to be so scarred up. He's never going to be able to go out into the world. I mean, boy, was I fucking wrong. And how ridiculous did I feel? And it just taught me. It's just, man, where there is a will, there is a way, man. He did not want to die. He wanted to be there. He knew he had to be there for us. And whatever it took, man, he persevered. I mean, I've never seen anything like that, ever, guys. I mean, to watch this day after day after day. And then he finally gets completely healed, in the sense that his body is now fresh scar tissue. He does not have open wounds anymore. When that's all said and done, the doctors tell him, and just so you know, Rod, you're a drug addict now. They had to, give him injections of morphine. And at that point, he needed so much morphine, they actually gave him, it's a drip. It's called a morphine drip. And what it is, it's a tube that they put above your heart. And it just drops morphine just steadily around the clock on his heart. And it was completely necessary due to the pain. In which they tell, my father that in order to, get off the drugs, that he's going to have to go to rehab, and he's going to have to sit with the group and all this stuff. And he tells the doctor, well, that's not going to work. I'm not going to sit with any group, and I sure the hell ain't going to rehab. And I don't care what you say. I'm not addicted to this. And if it's just physical dependence, which is very different than addiction. Remember, addiction is a mental desire to use. Physical dependence removes the will. It's just saying that your body needs it to actively function. He said, no, I'm not going, and I don't need anything. In fact, discontinue all pain medication, in which he cold turkeyed it. Cold turkeyed, a morphine drip addiction, which is way worse than an intravenous heroin addiction. I mean, morphine is like the Cadillac of opiates, and to be addicted to it through, a drip over your heart. I mean, it doesn't get any more intense and more direct than that with the strongest opiate on the market at that time. And he cold turkeyed it. Just went through it. 7 days, took him 7 days, and he beat it. Which, again, Rod Calek, man, the most driven dude. I mean, just a soldier, man. And he sets his mind on it. There is no maybe. Whatever he says he's going to do, you can set your clocks and place bets on it, man. Like it's going to happen, I love that about him. And what I also liked about him is he was just one of those guys he was good at so many things. And I truly think he could have been successful at anything that he wanted to do. He was just, if he liked something, he could master it. I remember seeing these photographs that he took when he was younger. He was really into photography when he was coming out of high school. And he won like a Time magazine photography competition. And it was a photo of this squirrel, and it just looked beautiful. It was just black and white photo of this squirrel that was like eating this nut, and he got this incredible photo. And he won this Time magazine competition. And he was telling me about the picture. He told my brother this story too, where it looked like he had the most perfect like live action shot of this squirrel. And I found out later that he actually shot the squirrel with the pellet gun and staged the squirrel perfectly for the shot. But he had just a ton of black and white photography. He still does from when he was a kid. And he was just an incredible photographer. Trumpet, he can play the trumpet incredibly well. I remember the first time he broke it out because he did that, before he got injured. So it was really when he would come home, from being, traveling the world with the Air Force, and he would break out his trumpet, and he could just wail on the trumpet, man. I used to love to just sit and listen to him play that trumpet. And if you ever, try to play the trumpet, that's an incredibly difficult instrument. But he was like that with everything, like anything that involved, thinking and delicacy and math. He was awesome at. He was an incredible pool player. He won several Nebraska state championships at pool halls. And for a time period before he went into the service, he supported himself going to pool halls and just sharking the hell out of people. He was left-handed and just always had just such an awesome, stroke with the pool cue. He was just so good at pool. My brother is too. And I tried for years to be good at pool because, later on in life we had a pool table. And I tried to be good at it just as a way to kind of get to know him. And God, was I terrible at pool. And, he liked 9-ball more than anything else. And man, he would run 6, 7, 8 tables on me before I'd even get to shoot. And he'd do it talking and walking around and singing like he wasn't even trying, hard at all. And he was just an incredible pool player. He was incredible at chess. Just like I said, anything that was like a thinking man's game, he was so good at. But you know what's funny? It's the little things you pick up and you don't realize later in life, where you got them until you think about it. But, when I travel, with Justin and, the guys on my team, especially when we were younger and we would room together, I used to drive Justin and Joey crazy because I can't sleep in. I can't sleep in. And I never realized till I got older and thought about it, that was a direct habit from him. My dad hated getting up late because he used to always say, the world's passing you by. Get out of bed, the world's passing you by. And I feel the same way. Like, even today, Laura will tell you, if I sleep in till 7 a.m., that is sleeping in for me. I'm usually up every day between 4:30 and 5 a.m. That is just my natural clock. That's when I wake up. I like taking my time when I get up. I like thinking about the day. I like really kind of planning it out. He was the same way. Dad could not just sleep in. He could not stand it. He always pushed that to us too. Got a whole day ahead of you. Get out of bed. Day's passing you by. But the part that used to drive Justin and Joey crazy is I'm a morning singer. Like the second I open my eyes, I just fly out of bed and I'm up and I'm singing. Well, my dad did this my entire life. He did it for his own enjoyment. He would wake up. You could always tell when Dad was up because you'd hear the door open, you hear the coffee machine go on, and then the singing comes. But he would always do it like to fuck with me. Like, he knew that I hated when school started because that meant baseball season was over. And that was like my jam, man. When I was in high school, everything was about baseball. And when baseball ended, there was only a couple more weeks left until school would start. And I hated it. I hated going back to school. And he would get like a foot away from my ear. I'd be sleeping like a baby. And all of a sudden, jet black room, 5 a.m., I would just hear, school days, good old golden rule days. I'd be like, yo, Dad, stop. And he's like, time for homework, time for books, school days. Good old golden rule days. And it would just get louder and louder and louder until he'd just be dancing through the house in the morning, just singing at the top of his lungs. And it's the same thing with Easter, man. I despised going to church. Now remember, after he got injured, he became very religious. Before he got injured, we were atheists. I mean, we went to church every now and then. We went to a bunch of different ones, but it was just a social thing for them. Like, some of their friends went, so sometimes they would go. And we went to Southern Baptist Church, Southern Methodist Church, and Catholic churches, and Lutheran churches. And he would always make me go to church on Easter. And same thing. I'd be sleeping in bed, just crashed out, and all of a sudden I'd hear, every morning is Easter morning from now on. Every day is resurrection day, the past is over and gone. I'm like, oh my God, you're killing me. And he just keeps singing it over and over again. I'd be walking downstairs, get in the shower, get out of the shower, and from the floor above me, I just hear, I am one of the Easter people, my new life has begun. I mean, I know these songs because he sang them so many Easters in a row. And he just corny shit like that, he just, and I would drive Justin and Joey nuts with this because I just had a habit. We'd be traveling and stuff. Even if we partied or if we were working late or whatever we did, come 7, 8 a.m., I would fire out of the bed and just start singing. And And Justin and Joey were always both like, dude, what are you on, man? Like, why can't you sleep in, man? It's like you wake up and, it's like you smoke some crack or something, And it was just, I was used to that. I was just used to, I think he must have set an alarm for like 4 a.m. because he was up so early every day, no matter what. He was always the first one up. And he was always awake. God, he was always awake when I went to sleep. I can't think of one time where he went to bed before I did. And I usually went to bed around, I don't know, 10:30, 11 at night in high school. But yeah, every morning is Easter morning from now on. But when I say he was religious, the cool thing about that is he was religious in the right way. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to spirituality, I truly believe that is an excessively personal thing. And I think it's different to each person. My father was a Christian, but he shared that in the way he lived. And what I mean by that is, my dad studied the Bible. When I say he studied it, my dad's favorite pastime was drinking a 12-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon as he studied his Bible. And once he got done with the King James and read that thing like 40 times, and I'm not kidding, I'm talking, if I showed you his King James Bible, I want to get a picture of it to show you guys. It is incredible. The amount of notes, it's unbelievable. I think he knew the damn thing forwards and backwards. It was crazy because he got to the point where he had read the King James so many times, he eventually went and found an old Hebrew Bible that was translated from like one of the earliest writings of the Bible. And I know for a while he was really getting into the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he studied the whole book of Enoch too and all that stuff. He was so into it, and he had so many awesome stories. And here's the thing, if you asked him about it, he would sit and talk with you about it as long as you wanted. And there were so many times where I would say to him, Dad, I'm struggling with this whole God thing, because it's been, I am a believer. I am a believer in a great spiritual being that created all of us. And there's been times in my life where I feel like, I'm totally Christian, and there's times in my life where I don't feel as though like I'm Christian as much as I just feel a spiritual connection to something big. And I've always kind of had an issue with denominations, because denominations are man-made. Spirituality is innate and divine. No matter who it is, there's always been this innate feeling that mankind has that there is something greater, there is a creator. And denominations were, like I said, man-made. And, the one thing that man has porn star abilities at doing is just fucking something good up, you know what I mean? And I just have always felt like, the Bible started out as this great message, and I always kind of looked at it like that, like it was just a book of messages. And, the more and more mankind got their hands into it, the more and more they fucked up this beautiful message, And there was times where I would say to Dad, I am just struggling, man. I have such a hard time with this, because my dad, like I say, was a Christian, so he believed that you had to accept Christ as your Savior to get to heaven. And I used to always be afraid to tell him that I'm struggling with that, because I didn't want him to think, oh shit, my son's going to go to hell. And he never did that. He used to always say to me, son, listen, it's perfectly normal to have these feelings. It's always say the hardest thing in the world is to have faith. It's the hardest thing in the world is to have actual faith. And I asked him one time, I said, well, aren't you worried that, what if I die and I don't ever get to where you're at, if I don't get to this infinite belief in Christ as my Savior, are you afraid that I'll, go to hell? Or and he just always saying, no, no. He was like, Christ works in mysterious ways, Chad, and he reveals himself to you at the time you need him the most. And if if you haven't had that experience today, where you feel that connection, you will. It'll come when it comes. And yeah, he never was concerned. No matter how dramatic my beliefs got, because at times I was out there, man. When I was in college, I was I don't know if you guys know this or not, but in addition to being a journalism major with an emphasis in electronic media, I was also a double minor. One minor was sociology, and my other minor was religious studies. And throughout my religious studies courses, I studied every known religion in the world, because I was just trying to get my footing. I was trying to get my spiritual footing. Like, who am I spiritually? And, everything from Judaism to Christianity, Taoism, Sikhism, Hinduism, it's just Maoism, there was just so many. I studied them all. And at times I had this belief system that kind of borrowed from all of them. And I think I was more lost then than anything else. But, I would bring up these ideas that were so foreign to him. And he never got mad at me. He never got mad at me. He would never tell me I was wrong. He would just tell me the way he felt and why he felt. And a lot of times we would just talk about certain stories in the Bible. And, what it meant to him, how he translated it. And I swear to you guys, he should have been a professor when it comes to, Christianity, because at one point he was really considering, like seriously considering, becoming a preacher. And this lasted about 2 years, where he was like, I'm talking dead serious. And I finally asked him one day, I said, well, was that, a serious run that you had there where you were considering that? And he was like, oh yeah. And I said, well, what happened in the end? And he goes, I just, woke up one day and the same inspiration wasn't there. And I go, really? And he goes, yeah, well, the whole time I just felt divinely inspired to do more. And he goes, and then I didn't feel it. And I prayed to God, and the answer that I got was that I had fulfilled what I was supposed to do. And I said, oh, so you don't feel as though you have any need to preach or anything anymore? And he goes, I think I've already done that. And I don't know if he meant me or my brother or other people, because my dad was that to a lot of people. A lot of people would talk to him about spirituality. My Uncle Mike used to come up, and this was like my dad's best friend. Great guy. God, great guy. He's my dad's old biker buddy, and, he would come up and hang out with my dad, and they would talk religion forever. And I used to wonder if maybe there was something with my Uncle Mike that he fulfilled. But regardless, he always had that spiritual connection. And he was so, I don't know, it was inspiring. It was inspiring to see somebody that was that certain of their religious path. But even when questioning stupid shit I did or how I was living my life, he would never use the Bible as a weapon. He used to tell me that, when my dad was a child, he was Catholic. He actually went to a Catholic, like a private Catholic school. And I thought he left the church because he told me these stories about how these Catholic nuns would give him like Sunday school homework. And if he got the questions wrong, or if he did something during Sunday school that was wrong, he would have to hold his hands out. And they had these really long rulers. Like he said, they were like 3-foot rulers that they would just swing down and crack him right on his knuckles. And he said they would do it all the time. And he got to the point where he hated going to church because he was just going to take a beating. And I was like, Jesus, man. I'm like, that's so fucked up. I'm like, so is that why, you left the church? And he was like, no. He was like, those women were crazy. They were not that's not God's will. That's not, what God meant to be taught. They were sinning. They were lost. And I said, okay, well, why did you leave the Catholic Church? And he said, well, it's not really so much the Catholic Church as much as it was, all denominations. He goes, I just found that in a lot of denominations, a lot of them are built on guilt. He goes, I don't think God wants you to do anything because you feel guilty about something. You should want to do the right thing because in your heart it's the right thing. And in the end, my dad was non-denominationally Christian. He, literally was just Christian. Had no, he wasn't Lutheran or Protestant or Catholic, or he was just Christian. And I remember the first time he talked with me about that. That was somewhere where we really found common ground, because I agreed. Whoever God is, I just don't think that, at least my God, I've always said, the Church of Love is the only church I know. It's hard for me to separate God from love. I just think they're one and the same. If you ever have that feeling of true love, or, the first time, I remember looking into Laura's eyes the day we got married and just thinking, man, I love this girl. It was just the best feeling. Same thing, first time I ever held my daughter. It's like I saw God in her eyes, it just, that feeling is, I felt high. Like I felt like, you feel so indescribably good. And I've just never felt that God or a creator would want you to fear, I always say her, because I think if God has a sex, it's a woman, for a lot of reasons. He disagreed with me on that, but he understood where I was coming from on that too. We had a lot of talks about that, whether God was a man or a woman. He felt as though God was neither, and God was a being. But anyways, we always connected on that, the thought that, God does not want you to fear him or her. But there were aspects of the Catholic Church that he liked. He liked ritual, and he liked, like communion. Not that, he really believed it was the blood of Christ or the body. He liked, anything that, made you really stop and focus on what you were doing. Same thing with confession. Although he would be the first one to tell you that confession doesn't really matter as far as, you don't got to talk to a priest, and the Hail Marys don't matter. What matters is that you would take time and work on yourself, and that you would, voice what you did wrong, and you would have to face it. And we had many conversations about that, where he talked about how important it is to own up to your own bullshit. And I can say there were many times in my life where I would catch my dad doing or saying something stupid, and I would hear him, in the garage or somewhere else, kind of talking to himself under his breath. He would do this thing where he would go, "Oh, God damn it, Rod, you could do better." He would say like that to himself. Like he would, whatever, he would yell at me. And maybe just because he was stressed out or something, and he didn't mean it, Seconds later out here, you got to do better than that, Rod. You got to do better than that. And he just talked to himself under his breath. And I always dug that about him, the idea that someone could just own their mistakes. Like I said, he was so talented, you'd never hear him brag about himself. And he was the first one to accept his flaws. And that was a beautiful thing. That was a beautiful thing about him. My dad also loved his beer, man. My dad is a beer drinker. Pabst Blue Ribbon is his beer of choice. He loved dark beers. He just loved the dark beers, period. But Pabst Blue Ribbon, oh my God, my whole life, my dad was a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer drinker. And I'll tell you what, he also had the ability to drink all day and night and never be drunk. The weirdest thing you ever seen, he could just drink and drink and drink and drink. And very rarely would you even be able to tell if he had a buzz. One of his favorite pastimes, like I said, he loved to drink beer, listen to his George Thorogood, Bob Seger, the Highwaymen album, like those 3 records are always on repeat. But he would love to go out into his garage with all his tools, and he would just set up with his music playing, and he'd get his beers out, and he'd start reading his Bible, studying his Bible. But like I said, one of the things that I liked is when I was going through my religious, and like I said, I'm still going through it now because it's always evolving. He would give me, like I said, he would never come to me, but I would go to him to talk about religious stuff, and he would give me parts of the Bible that he thought related to whatever the question I had was. And it got to the point where I ended up reading the Bible countless times, to the point where I could remember, like, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Like, I knew all the books of the Bible because I just read it so much. And, it was cool because that was something we always enjoyed doing, was discussing religion. But we never fought. We never fought once about it. That's really rare because religion is kind of like politics. Justin and I have fought over religion a million times. We've fought over politics a million times. My best friend, we fought over all the time. And he just wouldn't allow that to happen because he just never judged. He never judged. And he never preached. He never threw it at you. Never. And when it came to those like father and son moments, we never had like the traditional sit down birds and bees type, talk. But when I was 15, I thought Laura was pregnant. And that is not, what we had hoped our future would be at that time. And of course, I was terrified and she was terrified, and I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. So I knew I needed to talk to my dad. And, I remember basically telling him, we were driving and I'm trying to think of the exact words he said, but I'll paraphrase. Basically, he just said to me, "You're a man now. You chose that path, and I understand it. I'm not going to say you were wrong. I'm not going to say you shouldn't have done it." I think he knew, that I cared about Laura. I think he wasn't blind to what was going on. But he basically, cracked a beer and, said to me, like, it's time to, be a man. It's time to get a job and figure this out. But you will be okay. Like, he didn't drop a hammer on me like you're evil or bad and you're so fucked. It was more like, I'm going to be here for you, but like, this is your responsibility. Like, understand that, this is on you, and you're going to have to grow up fast. And, without saying it in those exact words, he basically said, I'll be here in the way that I can be here for you to help you, act like a man, but this is on you. And I think she's a great girl, and don't think your life is over and everything, because it's not. It's just a different path. He handled it like the right way. No guilt. He didn't make me feel embarrassed or weird, but he definitely made it clear to me, I'm playing a man's game now. And he didn't bullshit me. I remember that day of being terrified to tell him, and then afterwards actually feeling like, well, if this happens, there's light at the end of the tunnel type thing. And, I'll be okay. I'll figure this out. And, he was just kind of like, so how far along is she? And I'm like, well, I think she's only like a couple weeks late. Her birthday was the first time. And it's quiet. And he just goes, couldn't you have got her something else for her birthday? I was like, yeah, wish I would have. But obviously that, didn't happen. And it was a, false alarm. Laura was not pregnant. And I remember that relief too. And him kind of looking at me like, you dodged the bullet there. Like I said, he was the way a dad should be. He wasn't there to fix my problems, but he wasn't there to make life worse either. He was there to be supportive. But I'll tell you what, man, one thing that my dad always demonstrated, and I pray I pray there will come a time where I can exercise forgiveness on the level that he demonstrated. And I've gotten much better as I've gotten older. When I was younger, I was such a judgmental dick. I mean, I was just, man, I held people to such a standard that was so ridiculous. And as I got older, I've learned more that people are just people, and good people do bad things all the time, and good people make mistakes all the time. And my dad was just, he just had this ability to forgive in ways that I never could. You know, I'll tell you a story here, and it was one of the most terrifying stories. I mean, one of the most terrifying events I've ever lived through. My Uncle Donnie on my mother's side, I never disliked my Uncle Donnie. I always liked him, but he scared me because he had some mental issues, and he would just kind of go off at times and become really violent. And he was in and out of our life, you know, in different intervals. Like, he would show up at our house and visit for a time period, visit my mom for a time period, and then he'd just be gone, you know, a couple years later, and he'd disappear for 2 or 3 years, and then he'd show back up. And, you know, when I was a sophomore, he showed back up. And one day I came home, and I had this four-wheeler that I was always driving around. And I came home one day, and I was going to go ride my four-wheeler, and it was gone. And, you know, I came back and I said, "Hey, Dad, my four-wheeler's gone. Does somebody have it?" Because I'm like, I think it got stolen, you know? And he went out and he was like, "Oh, no, holy shit. Like, what is going on?" I'm like, "I don't know." And I could hear it. I could hear the engine humming, but Perth is just a small town. You could hear, you know, from one side of town to the other, you could whistle and hear it. We used to whistle for our dog to come back, and he'd be on the far end of town. He'd come running back. And, you know, I hear this four-wheeler on the back end of town. So I hop in my vehicle, and I go looking around, and I drive up to the back of town, and I look down this hill, and I could see that the four-wheeler is just, I mean, it's trashed. It rolled all the way down the hill, like someone wrecked it. And I'm thinking, oh shit, you know, did he take this and wreck it? Because, you know, he was staying with us at the time. So I drove back home, and, you know, my dad was up in the garage, and he was like, you know, "Did you find anything?" And I was just like, yeah, I found the four-wheeler. I'm like, but I didn't find Donnie. And my little sister at that time, you know, she was living with us. She was, you know, maybe like a year. She's like 4 years old. So I just go back in the house, and when I'm on the top floor, I don't remember where my mom was. She was, I think maybe outside at the front of the house, but I hear him down in the basement, or somebody. And I go down there, and Katie's down there, and it's Donnie, and my Uncle Donnie is talking to Katie, but he's not making any sense. He's, I mean, slurring his words and basically talking to her about how he don't need to be here anymore, and he's done with it all, and he's just having this kind of mental breakdown. And I look over, and I see he has my dad's .357 Magnum handgun, and I'm like, oh shit, you know. And I look, and I'm like, you know, Donnie, is that my dad's gun? I even get it out of my mouth, and he pulls the gun. And he starts going off, and he's talking about how, you know, he's going to blow his brains all over Katie. And, you know, I could see from where he's holding it that this thing's fully loaded. Now, how he knew where my dad's gun was, because it was in a lockbox put away in his closet, up on a top shelf. So there's like no way it could have ever fallen into the possession of Katie or myself or Brian. But he had it. So he had obviously cased our place and been going through stuff and doing shit he shouldn't do. And he's yelling, basically saying, you know, that no one respects him. He's just, basically, he's mad. He doesn't have anything specifically that he's pointing. He's just mad. And he's saying he's going to, you know, shoot himself. And that's when I said, well, Donnie, don't. As you know, Katie's down here. Don't do this. And that's when he said, I don't give a shit. I'll blow my fucking brains all over her. And he was yelling, and I was praying that somebody would hear. And where Katie was, I couldn't make my way quite to her without crossing like within a foot of him. And I'm thinking, how do I do this? What do I do? Like if he, basically starts to go towards Katie, I already made in my mind, well, the only way that I'm going to be able to stop that is to get in between him and her and take the bullet. And I was ready. I mean, like if he would have turned on her, then I would have been in between him and her. And about that time, I just hear over my shoulder, I hear my dad just go, "Donnie." Now, I'm petrified, guys. Like, I am telling you, there is an absolute crazy man in front of me that's bleeding, by the way, because when he wrecked the four-wheeler, he just cut the shit out of himself on this barbed wire fence. He's got blood all over himself. He's swinging around a 357 that's loaded. And, right as my dad yells to him, Donnie looks back at him. And my dad's like, "Donnie, what are you doing?" And he starts going off about how he's going to kill himself and he don't give a shit. And he starts like wildly swinging the gun around. And I am so terrified. And thinking, man, all he's got to do is just, squeeze off 3 rounds and we're done. We're done. My dad walks up slowly and he walks right in front of me. And he like reaches his arm out to kind of like, direct me back behind him. And the second, my dad's basically looking at Donnie, he's just going, "What are you doing with that gun, Donnie?" And the second Donnie just happens to look down at his gun, I just basically shoo Katie over by me and get her behind me so she can get out of the room. But I'm still standing there. Listen, at any moment, Donnie could pull this trigger. I mean, that's what I'm faced with. I mean, there's a reality here that at any moment, he could fire this 357 into my face or my dad's. And I was terrified. And my dad was, like I said, a fucking warrior, man. And he basically looked at Donnie and he said, "Donnie, listen, I think you're going to give me that gun, I'm going to beat you with it, or I'm going to take it away from you and shoot you." There's something, basically what he gave him an ultimatum. You got 3 seconds to hand that to me. You're going to be in a situation that, you wish you weren't in. But remember, Donnie's got the gun. And he went eyeball to eyeball with my dad. My dad looked at him and he just said, "Donnie, don't you fucking do this." And I'm just like sitting there just going, oh my God. My dad walks up straight, just walking towards him. My dad's walking slower and slower and slower. And he's just walking right up to Donnie. And they're like about a foot apart. My dad puts his hand out and he said, "No, Donnie, you give me that fucking gun." Donnie just stares at my dad. They hold a glare for about like 3 seconds. Donnie slowly picks it up. My dad grabs the gun from him, unloads it right there. Yeah, had some words, needless to say. Donnie was out of there. He went to a halfway house right after that. But that moment scared me so bad. And I felt like it was so unjust that Donnie would ever put Katie, much less myself or anybody else, but to put Katie in potential danger and tell me that you would blow your brains all over her. I told my dad this. He understood where I came from. And I said to him, as long as he lives, Dad, I don't want to ever see him fucking again. Okay? I'm like, the dude was waving a gun in my face. He told me he would blow his brains all over Katie. There is no Uncle Donnie in my life ever again. I don't want to see him. He's unsafe. And if you're unsafe, you're not going to be in my life. Well, Donnie took great offense to that, and it ended up being the spike between he and I for the rest of his life. And, my dad, pretty much after he took the gun from him, he essentially told him, the same thing that I was feeling, which is, you're out of our life. You're never coming back here. What you did was unacceptable. how in the hell did you get my gun out of my closet? You know, my dad figured out that he'd been snooping around our shit when he was staying there. He was probably looking for stuff to sell to get money to survive. Donnie spent a lot of time being homeless. He had some mental issues. And it's not my place to discuss how or why he did, but suffice to say, you know, my dad knew that Donnie's condition wasn't solely his fault. But in that day when that happened, you know, my dad pretty much told him the same thing. Like, you were dangerous. You're lucky that I don't kill you right here, right now. And, you know, you're out of here, that type of thing. And he ended up not pressing charges because I don't think he cared about him, but it's also, you know, my mom's brother. So there was this rift. And before Donnie passed away, he also showed up out here in California. And he tried to break into my house when I was gone and only Laura was here. You know, and I called my dad as well, and I'm telling him about it, and he's just rip shit pissed. And you know, obviously I am too. Well, fast forward, you know, a couple years, and Donnie is on his deathbed. And he's got days left. And, you know, I'm calling home, and I hear that my dad is with Donnie. I still have this anger in me. I have this just a bone to pick with him, man. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it go. And, you know, my dad ended up holding his hand while he passed. And he stayed with him the whole time until he passed. And I remember talking to my dad and going, Dad, can I ask you why you did that? I go, not that I think it's even wrong. I don't know how I feel right now. I just know that he threatened me. You know, he threatened you. He threatened Katie. You know, he was threatened Laura. You know, why were you there? And he said, Chad, I knew Donnie, and he was a cute little kid, and he had all the potential in the world, and a lot of things didn't go his way, and he was made to be kind of who he was. And he's like, I know the man inside there. I know that heart. He's like, believe it or not, your Uncle Donnie is not an evil person. And I said, Dad, but the guy, he said, look, I know, Chad. He's like, you don't have to convince me that those were horrible things that happened. And he's like, but I'm telling you, you know, that person who was swinging that gun around, who was angry, who was like, he's like, that's not who's passing away today. And I want him to know he was loved. And I was just like, wow. Like, you can forgive him for that, to make sure that he doesn't leave alone. And he just said, he's not a bad person. I want him to know that someone cares about him. I always thought that was profound. Just the ex of that forgiveness was so beautiful to me, because I don't have it in me. I was hurt, and I felt, betrayed by Donnie. I felt scared. I felt, why? You know, why are you out here in California? Why'd you freak out that day? Why are you getting guns? Why are you like wreaking havoc wherever you know what I mean? But there's my dad. There's my dad with him, making sure that, like everybody else, he got to go out with somebody at his side. I thought that was beautiful. Yeah, I thought that was real beautiful. I hope one day I can honor my father by having that same level of forgiveness. And that was the thing about him that was so interesting, is he was so old school and so hard-edged, But he had this he had this big heart. He had this big heart. Came out around puppies and babies too, man. My dad, he never liked to get puppies. He had like 4 or 5 different puppies throughout his life. He never liked to get them, and this is a true story, guys, because he knew one day they would pass away, and he knew it would break his heart. That's why. Every puppy we ever had, my dad literally dug their hole and gave them like their own funeral. I'm not kidding you. Like he would fall in love with our puppies. His last one, Shaggy, he loved so much. Just this tiny little crazy Jack Russell Terrier that just loved him, that would just not leave his side. And then, unfortunately, the dog was never let out of the fence. And then one time it happened, and Shaggy took off after this rabbit, and a car hit him. And my dad told me the story about how he had to put him down because his back half was hit by this car. And as my dad was telling me the story, he started welling up and crying. That was only the 3rd time I had seen my dad cry. The first time I had seen him cry was when he was burned, just because the pain was so excruciating. And then I saw him cry again during American Ghost Hunter. And then when he was telling me about Shaggy, and he was so gentle with little puppies. And like I said, it's so funny because he was kind of just this old school hard-edged dude that you would never know that he had this ultra tender heart for puppies. And the same thing with babies. My sister's little boy and little girl, and God, the first time he met Gracie, he was just just so attentive to her every step, and he loves the little things. As I said to him all the time, there's that Raising Arizona. It's one of our favorite movies with Nicolas Cage, and I used to die laughing because the biker in the beginning from hell, the lone biker of the apocalypse, they said he was especially cruel to the little things. I used to be like, Dad, he's the opposite of you, man. But I could go on all day long about the uniqueness of this man. But I want to share one more story. And just so you guys know, the reason I'm not talking about all the haunting and all that stuff is, first off, I talk about it a lot in the American Ghost Hunter, Devil in the Details, that special podcast series. I'm not trying to sell you on anything right now. I'm just telling you that I talk about it all in there. There's 11 hours worth of me talking about, him a lot in that series. And also the American Ghost Hunter documentary exists. So, the story of the haunting is just not something that was fun. And I was thinking about this the other day, if there was ever a time that I saw him afraid. I don't think there was. I don't remember a time where I saw him demonstrate fear. And I always thought my dad was a badass man. The eminent soldier. Just like I said, when he puts his mind to something, it's done, hell or high water. But I never saw him exercise fear, ever. And with the stuff that we experienced in that house, you would think that any human being, I exercised fear a ton. I was scared shitless the whole time. Hated everything about it. He was never afraid. He was at war. He was trying to destroy what was ever in that house because it threatened his family, and that's what he always put as his number one priority, was to protect us, But the one story I want to close with and tell you about occurred right before I moved out to Los Angeles. I got very fortunate. I would not be here today if it wasn't for my Aunt Terry, which is my dad's sister, obviously. when I was making my first film called The Private Public, I was working really hard to make it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was busting my ass and I was giving it everything I had. And slowly but surely, it was coming together. And it was one of those things that if I had to go back and do it again today, knowing what I know now, it was one of those ignorance is bliss things where I think the only reason it got made at the level that it did is because I didn't know how impossible it was to do. Anyways, I initially went to my aunt about, helping to fund it. And she never said no. She said no at that moment just because she said I wasn't ready yet. And she's an incredibly savvy businesswoman. And, I think she wanted to see, would we fold it up and call it a game, or would we keep pushing on? And I don't think what Terry knew initially is that, with or without her or any one person, it was getting made. Somehow I was going to make it. I don't give a shit. Somehow it was going to happen. And Terry saw that progress happening. To make a very long story short, eventually she helped me out with that film. And, Terry and I realized how much we have in common. And one of the greatest blessings of my life, Terry, at the time, I had accomplished everything that I could really accomplish locally as far as, with my band, 35-Inch Mutter, we were number one on the radio. We were playing the Hilton Coliseum. We were big in that city. And the same thing with, the Private Public for where we were in a non-film market, in a farming community. Somehow we made a movie that had some known people in it and a really interesting script. And I think Terry saw that I was really serious about this. And to my surprise, she called one night and said, where do you want to be? Like in 5 years, 10 years, where do you want to be? And I'd said to her, LA or New York. And so she put me on a plane to visit New York. I had some friends out there that I had talked to before, but I'd only been there once to showcase. I went out there and pretty quickly realized that wasn't just too fast for me. It wasn't my mode, Not that I don't love New York, I do, but to live there, it wasn't for me. So I ended up visiting LA with Terry. And I wasn't for sure if she was really serious that we were going to actually move me out here to make a go at this career. And, when we were out here, we actually got an apartment and I couldn't believe what was going on, but we got an apartment and we found a great deal on one and we got an apartment. And, I told my parents that, I was leaving. I was going to LA. And at that point, you have to understand the timeline with my dad. When I was a kid, like I said, he wasn't really around a ton. But the times that he were so special because, like I said, he was just like this, it's like G.I. Joe was coming home, man. It was like, this soldier was my dad and he was badass. And then he got out of the service to really spend time with my brother and I. But shortly after he got out of the service, that's when he got burned. So, between, the ages of 11 until I was a good, 17 years old, so that 6-year time period there, most of it was spent kind of nursing him back to health. I mean, your wounds healing where you're not going to die of infection is one thing, but, then he's got to physically regain strength. He's got to learn how to walk again. So there's just a lot of stuff he had to do before he can get back to being normal, So in that window, he was around, but it was always kind of more, I just knew he had a tough go. So there wasn't a ton of father-son time, you know what I mean? I was also going to school 8 hours a day and then playing baseball, 3 hours a day or going to the batting cage for 3 hours. So I wasn't around, and my point that I'm getting at is that time period, I only just started to get to know him on a, man-to-man level, friend-to-friend level. And I loved it. I loved that we were getting to know each other like that. And then in college, really cool things were happening for me between my band and the film and this column I was writing. And we talked a lot more then. That's when I started calling home and having the religious conversations I was just telling you about. Obviously, with the haunting and all that stuff, there was a lot to talk about when I would call home. There was just a really kind of budding, friendship, with this guy that was my hero my whole life. And the more and more I got to know him on that level, the more and more I loved it. I was just like, man, this guy is as cool as I always thought he was, man. He's old school. He's badass. His word matters. He's talented. He's funny. He's being my friend, but he doesn't let me forget that, listen, I'm your friend and that's cool, but like, don't get it twisted. I'm your fucking father, so don't act a fool, it was super cool, man. And I was just really getting to figure out who he was, and he was figuring out who I was. And we had this really cool relationship going on, and I was loving it. And it came time for me to move to LA, and I never knew how he would feel about it because I was leaving school to do it. I only had a handful of credits, like 4 credits left to get a degree. And I'm just like, fuck it. I'm not going to wait and go back, a whole other year for that many credits, especially when I realized I didn't really need, once I got through, that's a whole other podcast, but once I got, basically to my senior year, I realized that I didn't even need my degree to do the job that I'm going to do. So, I went out with Terry. We signed the lease on my first little apartment. When I say little, it was little. I mean, it was like, it was big enough for the Murphy bed, a hot plate, and a bathroom. And Laura and I were both going to live there because I asked Laura if she'd move to LA with me. And when I asked her, we were not married yet. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, I definitely got to marry this girl if I'm going to take her out of state, because I knew then I was taking her out forever, like we're leaving, So we ended up getting married, and my dad was so proud. I mean, he loves Laura. He's always loved Laura. And I think, my dad definitely understood why I wanted to leave and go to LA. Mom did not. But what I was hoping is that my dad, could drive with me, that he could move me out to LA, just me and him would go, in the U-Haul, and he would get to see LA, and he would get to see my place and what his sister had done for me. And at that point in my life, I had never been alone with my father. Like going somewhere. I had never been to a place with my father alone where he and I could just have time to talk. Every time I talked to him, as I would call home, and my mom would always be within earshot, and we never really got to have just a conversation with him without it being like this 3-way conversation. I was never in a position where I could just be alone with my dad, and I wanted to just do something with him alone because I felt like the same thing. I'm really getting to know this guy really well, and he's everything I thought he was, man, and more. And, our relationship is really starting to grow, and I'm really feeling this, father vibe that just feels so good to have my dad in my life. And I remember my mom initially said, no, we're all going to go. It's me and him, and, we'll both go with you. And to be honest, there wasn't enough room in the U-Haul. Plus, I didn't want that. I wanted to spend some time with Dad. And, I didn't think Dad was going to do it because he would kind of be a fight, and I didn't want to make him have to fight, with Mom. And I'm like, fuck it. If it's going to be a fight, just ain't nobody got to move me out. I'll handle it, Well, out of the blue, to my surprise, Dad says, no, this is important. This is what you want, and I want to do it too. And, there shouldn't be any problem with you asking, just me to go out with you, So that's what happened. It was amazing, man. The drive out there, I have never laughed so hard in my life. We ended up turning the whole trip. We titled the whole trip. It was called The Adventures of El Gigante and Pollo Loco. I was El Gigante the Giant because I was so much bigger than him. And Pollo Loco was his nickname just because he couldn't believe that there was a place in California called Pollo Loco, which just means the crazy chicken. He said he couldn't believe there was a restaurant called Pollo Loco. But we had such an incredible time coming out, and we just talked about every aspect of life imaginable. And, we got out here to LA, and he had never been here. And he was just fascinated, man. I mean, I took him down to Man's Chinese, to Walk of Stars, sunset, down to the beach, and we unloaded, the little bit of stuff that I had from the U-Haul into the apartment, and I thought he was going to laugh how small it was, and he was like, "Son, this is perfect." I mean, it was right on the beach. You can see the Santa Monica Pier right outside my window. I thought it was incredible, but it was so small. I mean, it was like maybe, I don't know, 12 feet by 14 feet. If that, I mean, it was 16 feet, I guess, maybe. It was super small. And I remember after loading everything in, we went and got some of his PBRs, his Pabst Blue Ribbons. And we're both sitting there, and I didn't have my power turned on yet because I just got out here, so I didn't have that arranged yet. I had no cable, nothing. So we're just sitting in the darkness, and, through the window, the Santa Monica Ferris wheel is lighting up the inside of my place. And the windows and the colors are changing, and we're just having some beers. And we just sat there talking, like just having beers forever. And my dad's looking out the window, and he's like, "You got Laura coming out here?" He's like, this is really special, son." And he turns, and he's like, "Isn't that something? Right out your window, the Santa Monica Pier." I'm like, "Yeah, that's crazy, right?" He's like, "Boy, you've seen that in a million movies, haven't you?" And I was like, "The pier?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And he's looking out the window, and the lights are coming in, and he looks back, and he says, "Yeah, I'm really excited for you, son." He nodded, put his beer up, gave me like a toast. He's like, "Pretty soon, Laura's going to be out here, and you guys are going to have an amazing life." And I said, "Well, Dad, I thank you for, coming out here and kind of helping me with all this." And he was like, "Oh, don't thank me. I love it, man. I love seeing this happen for you." And we just had this incredible night of just drinking and laughing and just talking about life and just being friends, man, And the next day came, and he didn't know that I had some special stuff planned for him. Like I told you, that Bob Seger is one of his favorite artists, and so is Pink Floyd. Well, one of the friends I had was an A&R rep that tried to sign 35-inch Motor to Capitol Records, and his name was Scott. And I said, "Dad, I got a meeting I want you to come with me to." And he's like, "Meeting?" I'm like, "Yeah, just come on." So we go all the way down to Hollywood and Vine, and he's like, "What's going on?" And we walk right into Capitol Records, and I'm like, "Hey, man, can you tell Scott I'm here?" And they radio down right away, and they're like, "Yeah, come on up." So we go up, and we get off the floor, and I go and, introduce my dad to Scott. And while we're talking there, Scott had him, get the Pink Floyd Platinum album, and also the Bob Seger Platinum album. And my dad got to hold him. I just brought him out. I "Check this out, Pops." And he was like, "Oh, wow. And he got to hold, these platinum albums. We're all talking, and I said, "I got something else planned for you." And he's like, "What?" Scott had gotten the keys to the very top of Capitol Records. You can go up to the top, and then you can go on the roof. And from the roof, you can see all of Los Angeles. And the sun was just starting to go down. And, I talked to Scott for a while, and then Scott just said, "Well, hey, man, you know your way out. Enjoy, And I was like, "Thanks, brother." And Scott left. My dad was like, "So we can just hang out up here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man." He's like, man, isn't this something? And he's looking out, and he goes, man, you got to be excited. I'm like, oh, Dad, yeah, I'm so excited. He goes, no, this is really special, Chad. And he's like, thank you for doing all this for me, boy. I was like, yeah, for sure, I get, oh man. He just leaned over and gave me a hug and just said, thank you. I said, yeah, And we sat up there and we talked for a long time. We talked in detail about what I hoped the future would bring. And part of that future was I wanted him to get the chance to visit out here a lot. I thought LA was beautiful. He had a great time. And I knew the following morning he had to leave at 8 a.m. for a flight because he drove out here, but then he was going to fly home. That was the last night that we were going to hang out. So we went back down to the pier and went to this Irish bar right by there, and we had a beer and had a burger and took a walk on the sand, and just me and my pops, man, just on the beach in Santa Monica. I don't want to say, I guess it was kind of advice. He just kind of, talked to me about things to look out for, and he told me, I know you're going to be okay. I know you don't need to hear me. I said, no, Dad, I'd love to hear any nuggets you have, man, definitely. And he told me to stay true to myself and just never do anything that I couldn't put my head on the pillow at night. And that's always stuck with me. Yeah, it's competitive, and yeah, business is, it's hard, and at times it almost feels dirty sometimes. But he just said, listen, there's going to be people around you that do things that you wouldn't do, and don't be afraid to say no, and don't be afraid to stand up and say, these are things I'm not going to do, and I'm not going to act this way, and I'm not going to fuck someone over. And he said, just do it your way and never do anything that you can't get a good night's sleep on. And I understood that, and I thought that was such sound advice, and yeah, I lived that from him. The following morning comes, and I told him that, Dad, this isn't goodbye, but it feels that way, doesn't it? And he was looking at the beach. He was just standing, like, literally up on this little ledge overlooking the beach, and he goes, yeah, it does. He's got a real serious kind of look on his face, and I learned later on that the serious look was just he was going back to a hard life. Things are just different out there than they are here. And he had the same kind of post-trip sadness that I had. But I will never, ever forget what he said next. And I've told my aunt this story a ton of times. I just said, Pops, listen, I know you don't like to say it, face to face, eye to eye, but look, I love you. And thank you so much for, being you and for being here with me. And I just want you to know that, I'm going to see you again. And he gives me this big hug. And it lasts for a long time. And like I said, guys, he's not a touchy guy. He's never been that kind of dad. He's just not. So the fact that it was such a long embrace, he stops and he takes his glasses off, and I could see he's kind of wiping his eyes so the tears don't fall. He goes, look at me. And I looked at him, and he said, don't you come home. I go, what? But this chance, you build a life. And he says, don't you come home. And I knew what he was saying. He wasn't saying, I don't want you home. He was saying, you escaped. You have a chance. You fucking make this work. He knew what my Aunt Terry did for me. He talked about it many times on the trip, how this was my chance. I had a film complete under my arm. I had an apartment in Los Angeles. I had a beautiful wife that would arrive 2 months later. Don't you come back. He hopped in the car. I took him to the airport, and he went home. And I started trying to build something, Over the last, 17 years. I'll be honest, I didn't see Dad much. We talked, We talked, here and there. But he knew I was focused. He knew I was focused on building a life, and giving everything I had to this. And, we had our moments for sure. The first time he saw me on Paranormal State, he called me up and he was like, I'll be damned if you weren't on my television screen. He was, that blew him away. First time he was walking through Sears and someone came up and asked him for an autograph. They had seen American Ghost Hunter on Hulu, which he could not believe. That's one thing I want to make sure that I point out too. He really, really, really cared if the film helped people, because he asked me to send him home letters, of people that, found something in the film more than entertainment, which I did. I sent him home many letters of people who just, didn't feel so alone anymore. And that mattered to him. He really truthfully did the film for the right reasons. And I love that. Again, I love that about him, I know I've said that throughout this entire podcast. I love that about him. But the thing is, guys, I love that about him. I mean, I loved him. He was just a fucking awesome guy, man. Just an awesome guy. Unfortunately, I didn't get to spend the time with him that I wanted to over the last couple years. After his divorce, I just thought there'd be plenty of time moving forward for us to get together. And he was so happy, and he wanted to come out and see me, and I wanted to go back there, and Dad, I'll do it this month. I'll do it in January. I'll do it at Christmas, and get focused on work, and he always understood that. And then one day I called Dad and he's sick. Do not wait. Do not wait to tell people you love how you feel. If there's somebody in your life out there, guys, if there's somebody that needs to hear your voice, the cliche is true. Tomorrow is not a day promised. I didn't get to say everything I wanted to say to my dad, but I said enough. I said enough that he knows how I felt about him. And I know how he felt about me. And I just wanted you guys to know who he was. Because it would be a great injustice if he passed on and the song of Rod Calek just stopped playing and no one noticed. So I hope you guys got an idea as to who my father was. I am incredibly fortunate to have such an incredible man in my life. And yeah. Thank you guys for listening. And I really do appreciate it. Thank you guys. And we'll be back with more podcasts soon. This has been really hard to record, as you guys could probably imagine, but I'm so glad I did, because so much of this stuff needed to be said, and I just want a record of what this man meant and what he stood for. And because it's everything that matters. It's all the right shit. He's just an incredible guy. Pops, if you're somehow listening, get some rest. Think about you, man. Take care of yourself. I love you, man. You did everything right. Take care of you now. It's all of you. Thank you all for listening. I will be back tomorrow. Much love and all the best.